There are moments in life when everything you thought was stable collapses in less than 10 seconds. And for me, that moment began with a single sentence I will never forget. You are being terminated effective immediately. The words were spoken in a glass-walled office on the 23rd floor of a corporate building in downtown Chicago, where everything was too clean, too bright, and too indifferent to human emotion. I remember standing perfectly still, one hand resting instinctively over my stomach, as if that could somehow protect what was growing there. My manager did not look at me directly when he said it. Instead, he focused on a printed document in front of him, as though reading a grocery list rather than ending someone's livelihood. This decision is final, he added, sliding a folder across the table without urgency. Around me, my coworkers had frozen in uncomfortable silence. No one spoke. No one moved. I had worked at that company for 3 years. I had never received a negative review. I had stayed late, taken extra shifts, covered for others when they needed help. None of that mattered in that moment. Is this because I told HR about my pregnancy? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. The pause that followed was the only confirmation I needed. Company policy and restructuring, he replied, carefully avoiding my eyes. I nodded slowly because there is a strange kind of clarity that comes when you realize arguing will not change anything. I gathered my belongings in silence. A small desk plant I had kept alive for 2 years. A half-empty mug that said "World's Best Team Player." A folder of unfinished projects I had once believed mattered. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt the weight of every stair behind me, but no one followed. No one stopped me. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime that felt louder than it should have. By the time I reached the lobby, my hands were shaking. Outside, Chicago traffic moved like nothing had happened. People rushed past me with coffee cups, phone calls, and destinations that still made sense. I stepped onto the sidewalk and realized I had no direction anymore. That was when my phone buzzed. A notification from my bank confirmed what I already suspected. My access to company payroll had been terminated. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen until the words blurred. I remember thinking how strange it was that life could change so completely while the rest of the world continued unchanged. I placed one hand on my stomach again and whispered a promise I was not sure I could keep. We will figure this out. The wind picked up along the street, cold and indifferent, as I turned away from the building I had once believed was my future. I did not know it yet, but someone else was already watching the aftermath of that moment very carefully, and my life was about to intersect with a world I had spent my entire life avoiding. The worst part about losing everything is not the moment it happens, but the silence that follows it, when the world continues as if nothing important has changed. That silence followed me all the way across the city. I rode the train for 40 minutes without really seeing anything outside the window. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and uncertain, as Chicago blurred into streaks of gray and steel. By the time I reached my apartment building, my legs felt heavier than they should have. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaning detergent and old coffee. Everything here was ordinary, and somehow that made it worse. My apartment was small but clean, the kind of place you choose when you are trying to build a life slowly and carefully. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the couch, placing both hands over my stomach again without thinking. For a while I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the distant sound of traffic outside the window. Then reality began to settle in piece by piece. No job. No immediate income. No backup plan that felt stable enough to trust. I opened my laptop and stared at my bank account again, as if the numbers might change if I looked at them long enough. They did not. I closed it again. That was when the first knock came at the door. I hesitated. It was too early for anyone I knew. I walked slowly, every step measured, and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. Just a small black envelope placed neatly on the floor. My pulse increased immediately. I opened the door carefully, scanning the hallway. Empty. No footsteps. No movement. Only silence. I picked up the envelope and brought it inside. There was no name written on it, only a simple seal pressed into the wax, unfamiliar but precise. I broke it open. Inside was a single card with an address and a time written in clean, minimal print. Noon. Tomorrow. West Harbor District. I read it 3 times, trying to convince myself it meant nothing. It did not feel like nothing. My phone buzzed again before I could decide what to do. Unknown number. One message. You do not have to face this alone. I froze. The sentence was simple, but the timing was not. I sat down again, holding the card between my fingers, turning it over as if another explanation might appear on the back. It did not. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. Whoever sent this knew where I lived, knew what had happened, and somehow knew exactly when I would be most vulnerable. I should have been afraid, and part of me was. But another part, the part one did not want to admit existed, felt something else entirely. Curiosity. Not the reckless kind. The kind that appears when desperation and hope begin to overlap in the same place. I looked at my reflection in the dark window across the room. You are not going anywhere, I told myself quietly. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Because tomorrow at noon I would be at that address. And I had no idea that the person waiting there was not just connected to my future, but already deeply connected to the past I had never understood. The next morning arrived without clarity, only the strange persistence of a decision I had already made but still could not fully explain. I woke up earlier than usual, even though I barely slept. The address on the card was still on my bedside table, untouched, as if it might change overnight if I ignored it long enough. It did not. Chicago outside my window looked the same as always, but I felt completely outside of it now, like I was watching a life I no longer belonged to. By late morning I was already dressed, standing in front of the mirror without remembering the moment I decided to leave. My reflection looked tired, but focused in a way I did not recognize. I placed a hand on my stomach briefly, as I always did now, a silent reminder of responsibility that was no longer just mine alone. Then I left. The West Harbor district was not a place I usually went. It was quieter, older, filled with industrial buildings that had been repurposed into offices and private facilities. The air near the water carried a different weight, colder and more controlled. I followed the street numbers slowly, checking the address 3 times before stopping in front of a building that looked ordinary at first glance. There were no signs advertising anything, no indication of ownership, just a modern structure of glass and dark stone, guarded by silence more than security. I hesitated at the entrance. For a moment I considered turning around, but then the door opened from the inside before I could move. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, not aggressive, not threatening, simply observant. "Olivia Bennett," he said calmly, as if confirming something expected. I nodded once, unsure how he already knew my name. "You are expected," he added, stepping aside. Expected. That word stayed with me as I entered. The interior was nothing like I imagined. It was not cold or intimidating. It was controlled, minimal, almost architectural in its precision. People moved quietly through the space, speaking in low voices, focused but not hurried. No one stopped to stare at me, but I still felt every presence in the room. I was led down a long corridor lined with glass walls that revealed meeting rooms filled with documents, screens, and conversations I could not hear. At the end of the hallway I was asked to wait. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, though time seemed difficult to measure in that place. Then I heard footsteps. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Controlled. When I turned I saw him for the first time. Dante Russo. He did not introduce himself immediately. He did not need to. Everything about him carried certainty without effort. Dark tailored suit. Calm posture. Eyes that observed rather than judged. He stopped a few steps away from me, as if respecting a boundary I had not yet spoken aloud. "You came," he said simply. I crossed my arms instinctively, unsure how to respond. "I was told to." A faint pause followed. "No," he replied. "You were invited. There is a difference." I studied him carefully, searching for something that matched what I had imagined. But there was nothing theatrical about him. No attempt to impress. Only stillness and control. "Why am I here?" I asked. Dante looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Because what happened to you was not an accident," he said quietly. "And because you deserve to understand why." The words should have made me more afraid. Instead, they made everything worse in a different way. Because for the first time since I lost my job, I felt like someone was finally looking at the entire picture instead of just the pieces I had been given. The moment he said those words, Everything inside me tightened in a way I could not immediately explain. Because what does that even mean? I thought that what happened to me was not an accident. I stood in the quiet corridor of the building, surrounded by glass walls and controlled silence, trying to keep my expression steady. Dante Russo did not move closer. He simply observed me the way someone studies a situation they already understand but have not yet explained aloud. "You lost your job," he said calmly, as if confirming a fact already recorded somewhere. "Because you are pregnant," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. He did not react to the emotion in my tone. Instead, he slowly turned slightly, gesturing toward the hallway behind him. "Because your employer violated federal protections," he corrected. That sentence shifted something inside the air between us. I frowned. "How do you know that?" Dante did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward a nearby glass-walled room and opened a folder resting on the table inside. I followed reluctantly. The room was simple, modern, and filled with organized documents spread across a polished surface. Screens displayed reports, timelines, and corporate records I did not recognize at first. "Your termination was not isolated," he said. "It was part of a pattern." I looked at him carefully. "What pattern?" Dante tapped a file on the table. "This company has done it before. Pregnant employees, health-related terminations, quiet removals disguised as restructuring." I felt my stomach tighten again, but this time not from fear alone, from realization. "And nobody stopped them," I said quietly. "Until now," he replied. The simplicity of his answer was more unsettling than any dramatic explanation could have been. I sat down slowly without being asked, scanning the documents in front of me. The more I read, the more the situation expanded beyond anything I had imagined. There were internal reports, financial inconsistencies, legal complaints that had been dismissed without proper investigation. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Dante remained standing, his posture unchanged. "Because you were affected by it directly," he said. "And because you deserve to see what actually happened instead of what they told you happened." I looked up at him. "So what, you are some kind of investigator now?" A faint pause followed. "Not exactly," he said. "But I have resources that make it difficult for people like this to hide indefinitely." I closed the folder slowly, trying to process everything at once. The world I had left this morning felt distant now, almost naive in comparison. "And what do you want from me?" I asked. Dante finally met my eyes directly. There was no pressure in his gaze, no expectation disguised as kindness, just clarity. "Nothing," he said. That answer surprised me more than anything else. I blinked. "Nothing. You came here because you wanted answers," he continued. "Not because I demanded anything from you." A silence stretched between us. Outside the glass walls, people continued moving through the building as if nothing unusual was happening. Inside, everything felt different. "Most people in your position," Dante added after a moment, "are left alone with assumptions. That is where most damage begins." I exhaled slowly, looking back down at the documents. "So what happens now?" Dante's voice softened slightly, though his expression remained steady. "Now," he said, "you decide whether you want to understand the full truth, or return to what you were told was the truth." I did not answer immediately, because for the first time since everything fell apart, I realized I was no longer simply reacting to my life. I was being given a choice about it. The choice he gave me should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt strangely simple, as if the chaos of the past 24 hours had finally narrowed into something I could actually hold in my hands. I sat in the glass room of the West Harbor building, the documents still spread across the table, my mind replaying everything Dante had said. Return to what I was told was the truth or understand the full truth. The words kept circling in my thoughts, refusing to settle into anything comforting. I looked up at him again, still standing calmly near the table, as if he had all the time in the world and I had only this moment. "Why me?" I asked finally. It was not the first question I should have asked, but it was the only one that mattered in that moment. Dante did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward the window, where the city stretched outward in distant layers of glass and steel. "Because you did not accept what happened to you without question," he said. "Most people would have moved on. You did not." I frowned slightly. That is not a reason to involve me in something like this. I am not involving you, he replied. You are already inside it. The statement made my chest tighten again, but not in the way fear usually did. It was something more complicated. Something closer to realization. I stood slowly, stepping away from the table, needing distance to think clearly. If what you are saying is true, I said carefully, then my entire termination was not just unfair. It was part of something larger. Dante nodded once. Yes. The simplicity of his confirmation made it harder to dismiss. I looked back down at the files. Names, dates, patterns of behavior repeated across multiple employees. Not random, not isolated, systematic. And you stopped it from continuing. I asked. I interrupted it, he corrected. I glanced at him again. That sounds like a careful way of saying you are still in the middle of it. A faint expression passed across his face, not quite a smile, but close to acknowledgement. Most things worth stopping are never finished quickly. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, but not hostile. Just full. I sat down again slowly, my hand instinctively resting near my stomach, grounding myself in something real. I do not understand what I am supposed to do with this information, I admitted. Dante moved slightly closer to the table, placing one hand on the edge but not touching the documents. You do not have to decide anything right now, he said. You only need to understand that what happened to you was not because of your value. It was because of their convenience. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Convenience. Not performance. Not fault. Not failure. Convenience. I had built my entire understanding of the last few days around the idea that I had somehow lost control of my life through a personal mistake or unfortunate timing. But what he was suggesting removed all of that certainty. It replaced it with something colder and far more unsettling. Intent. I looked up at him again. And if I choose to understand all of this, I said slowly, what happens next? Dante met my gaze with the same steady calm he had shown since I arrived. Then you will no longer be reacting to your life, he said. You will begin to see who has been shaping it. A long silence followed. For the first time since losing my job, I was not thinking about survival. I was thinking about truth. And I was beginning to realize those two things were not the same. Understanding does not arrive all at once. Comes in fragments that slowly rearrange everything you thought you knew. I left the West Harbor building that afternoon with Dante's words still echoing in my mind. You will begin to see who has been shaping your life. The city outside felt unchanged, but I no longer trusted the surface of anything. Even familiar streets looked different, as if I was seeing them for the first time. Through a layer I had never noticed before. I walked without a clear destination for nearly an hour, trying to process what I had been shown. The documents. The patterns. The idea that my termination was not simply unfair but part of something structured. When I finally stopped walking, I found myself near a small riverside path where the noise of the city softened into distance. I sat on a bench, staring at the water, trying to separate fact from interpretation. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. One message. You should not try to understand everything alone. I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes for a moment. Because that message did not feel like a threat. It felt like continuation. I typed a response before I could second-guess myself. Then explain it. The reply came almost instantly. Not over text. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then another message appeared with a new location. Same district. 10 minutes away. I should have refused. I should have gone home. I should have done anything that aligned with what I would normally call caution. Instead I stood up. The walk to the second location felt shorter, though I knew it was not. The building was smaller than the first, less imposing, more discreet. No había saída. No visible security presence. Just a quiet entrance and a simple door that opened as I approached. This time I was not greeted by a stranger. Dante was already inside. Not seated at a table. Not waiting behind a desk. Just standing in the center of a modest room with large windows and minimal furniture. You came, he said, as if he had never doubted it. You said it was not over text, I replied. He nodded slightly. It is not something you can understand in fragments. I stepped inside fully, the door closing quietly behind me. The air felt different here. Less formal. More intentional. Start from the beginning, I said. Dante studied me for a moment before speaking. The company you worked for was never operating independently, he began. I frowned immediately. What does that mean? It means, he continued calmly, that it was part of a larger structure that has been protected for a long time by people who prefer it. Remain invisible. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my thoughts grounded. And you are telling me this because? Because you were removed from it, he said. And that removal was not random. The phrase repeated in my mind again. Not random. I shook my head slightly. This is too much, I admitted. Dante did not argue. He simply walked toward the window and looked out at the city beyond. Truth often feels that way at first, he said, until you realize how long you were living without it. I followed his gaze, seeing the skyline stretched across the horizon. Somewhere in that vast structure of glass and steel, my life had been altered without my awareness. The realization did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, almost incomplete. So what happens now? I asked again, softer this time. Dante turned back toward me. Now, he said, you decide whether you want to stop looking at the surface or finally understand what is underneath it. And for the first time, I understood that the real danger was not what I had lost, but what I might discover if I kept going. There are moments when you realize the ground beneath your understanding was never as solid as you believed, and everything you thought was certainty becomes something closer to interpretation. That feeling stayed with me long after I left the second location. I walked back through the city without fully seeing it, my mind replaying Dante's words again and again. Not random. Part of a larger structure. Protected by people who prefer it remain invisible. The phrases did not feel like dramatic claims anymore. They felt like pieces of a system I had unknowingly been standing inside my entire life. When I finally returned to my apartment, the space felt unfamiliar in a subtle way, as if I had changed and it had not. I set my keys down carefully and sat at the edge of the couch without turning on the lights. The city outside glowed faintly through the window, distant and indifferent. My phone remained silent for nearly an hour. Then it vibrated once. I did not recognize the number. You should not try to carry this alone, the message read. I stared at it for a long time. This time I did not respond. Immediately. Instead, I placed the phone face down and tried to organize my thoughts in a way that made sense. But nothing aligned cleanly anymore. Every explanation I had once used to define my situation felt incomplete. The termination, the company, the patterns in the documents, even my own assumptions about why I had been targeted no longer held the same certainty. A quiet knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. This time I did not hesitate. I opened it cautiously, expecting nothing and someone at the same time. Dante stood in the hallway, dressed the same as before, calm and composed, as if he had not traveled through distance or time to arrive there. You did not answer, he said simply. I folded my arms, trying to regain control of the moment. I was thinking. He nodded slightly, as if that was an acceptable answer. Thinking is good, he said. But isolation distorts perspective. I stepped aside without fully deciding to. He entered without hesitation, not as someone intruding, but as someone continuing a conversation that had already started long before this moment. The apartment suddenly felt smaller with his presence, not because he overwhelmed it, but because he made everything feel more defined. I leaned against the counter, watching him carefully. If what you are saying is true, I began, then this is not just about my job or my company. Dante looked at me directly. No, he said. It is not. The simplicity of his confirmation made my chest tighten slightly. I exhaled slowly. Then what is it about? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window and looked out at the city lights, as if measuring something beyond what was visible. It is about systems that do not appear on the surface, he said finally, and the people who believe they are safe because they never question what holds those systems together. I frowned. And you are one of those people who questions it. I am one of the people who has seen it, he corrected. Silence settled between us. I studied him carefully, trying to find exaggeration in his expression, something that would allow me to dismiss what he was saying. There was none. Why tell me any of this? I asked. Dante turned back toward me. Because you are already inside it, he said again. Whether you understand it or not. My thoughts slowed. And if I decide I do not want to be inside it? I asked. A faint pause followed. Not dramatic. Just honest. Then you will still be inside it, he said. The only difference is whether you see it clearly or not. I looked down at my hands, trying to steady myself. For days I had believed I was reacting to a single event. A termination. A loss. A disruption. But now that story no longer fit. It was too small. Too contained. Too incomplete. I looked up again. What happens if I choose to understand it fully? Dante met my gaze with the same calm certainty he always carried. Then you stop being affected by it blindly, he said, and start seeing where it begins. The words lingered in the room long after he stopped speaking, and for the first time since everything started falling apart, I understood that ignorance had not protected me. It had only delayed what was already coming closer. The hardest part about understanding something larger than yourself is realizing you can no longer pretend it is not real. After Dante left my apartment, I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the city outside as if it belonged to another world entirely. Everything I had believed about my life until this point felt like it had been drawn on thin paper, easily rewritten by someone I had never met. I did not sleep that night. I remained on the couch with the lights off, replaying every conversation, every document, every sentence that now carried a different weight. By morning, exhaustion had replaced shock, but clarity had not arrived. Instead, there was only the growing certainty that I could not return to ignorance even if I wanted to. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. I hesitated before answering. "You are not at work," Dante's voice said on the other end. It was not a question. "I am not employed there anymore," I replied. A brief pause followed. "Correct," he said. "Then you should come." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Where?" I asked. He gave me an address I did not recognize, different from the previous locations. When I arrived an hour later, the building was smaller, quieter, almost hidden between larger structures near the river district. There was no signage, no indication of purpose, only a controlled entry and a calm sense of privacy. I was escorted inside again, but this time I was not surprised by anything I saw. I was beginning to understand that nothing about Dante Russo's world was accidental. He was waiting in a room filled with documents and screens displaying structured information. When I entered, he did not greet me immediately. Instead, he gestured toward a chair across from him. "Sit," he said simply. I obeyed. Not because I was told to, but because resisting felt unnecessary at that point. "You said I am already inside this," I said once I was seated. Dante nodded. "Yes." "Then show me what that means," I added. He studied me for a moment, as if measuring whether I was ready for the next step. Then he turned one of the screens toward me. On it were interconnected records, financial structures, corporate layers, and entities that spanned across multiple industries. It was not a single company. It was a network. "Your former employer is only one point in a larger system," he explained. I leaned forward slightly, focusing on the diagrams. "And this system does what exactly?" I asked. Dante did not rush his answer. "It influences decisions that appear independent," he said. "It redirects outcomes that people believe are random." I frowned. Why would anyone build something like that? "Control," he said simply. The word settled heavily in the room. I looked back at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. It was too structured to be coincidence, too interconnected to be dismissed as theory. "And my termination," I said slowly, "was part of this influence." Dante met my gaze directly. "Yes," he confirmed. I felt a strange mix of disbelief and clarity forming at the same time. "So what happens now?" I asked again, though the question felt different this time. Less fearful. More grounded. Dante leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. "Now you begin to see where your situation connects to patterns that have existed for years," he said. "And you decide whether you want to remain someone affected by those patterns, or someone who understands them." I looked at the screens again. The complexity was overwhelming but no longer abstract. Somewhere inside it, My life had been redirected without my knowledge. I slowly stood up, my hand steady this time. If I continue, I said, there is no going back to not knowing. Dante watched me carefully. There never was, he replied. And in that moment I realized the truth he had been guiding me toward all along was not about power or fear. It was about awareness. Once you see the structure beneath your life, you cannot unsee it. And the only question left is whether you are willing to stand inside it with open eyes. There are moments when understanding does not arrive with noise or revelation, but with a quiet acceptance that something irreversible has already begun. I stood in Dante Russo's facility, surrounded by information that now no longer felt abstract, only connected. The more I had seen, the less I could return to the version of myself who believed life was random. Dante remained calm as always, watching me without interruption, as if my silence was also part of the process. Finally I spoke. If everything you showed me is real, then this is not just about my job or one company, I said. He nodded once. It is not. I took a slow breath, trying to organize thoughts that no longer fit into simple categories. Then what exactly am I inside of? I asked. Dante did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the screen again, where networks of data and relationships still remained visible. You are inside a system that has always relied on people not asking that question, he said. The simplicity of his answer made it more unsettling than any complexity could have. I looked at the information again, this time not as a victim of one decision, but as someone trying to understand scale. And now I know, I said slowly, so I cannot go back. Dante finally looked directly at me. No, he said. You cannot. The word was not threatening. It was final in a different way, like a door that had already closed behind me without sound. I stepped closer to the screen, studying the structure again. It was no longer just corporate. It was layered, intentional, and far more extensive than I had imagined. Somewhere inside it, my former employer was only a small branch of something much larger. What happens to people who see this? I asked. Dante paused briefly before answering. Most do not believe it, he said. Some ignore it. A few try to walk away. I turned slightly toward him. And the ones who do not? Dante met my gaze evenly. The ones who do not, he said, learn how deeply their lives were already connected to it. A long silence followed. The weight of that truth was not loud. It was steady, like something that had always been present but never acknowledged. I placed a hand lightly on the edge of the table, grounding myself. I do not want power, I said quietly. Dante's expression did not change. Good, he replied. That answer surprised me. I frowned slightly. Why is that good? Because this is not about power, he said. It is about awareness and what you choose to do once you have it. I looked back at the screen again, the structure still glowing softly with interconnected paths. So what is my choice now? I asked. Dante stepped away from the display, giving me full attention for the first time without distraction. You decide whether you step back into a life that feels simple but incomplete, he said, or remain inside a truth that is complex but real. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything converge into a single point. The job I lost, the documents I saw, the messages I received, the building I stood in now, all of it led to this moment of understanding that nothing would feel the same again. I looked at Dante, and for the first time I did not feel like someone being guided. I felt like someone being invited to see clearly. If I stay, I said carefully, what am I expected to become? Dante's answer came without hesitation. Someone who can see what others cannot, he said. And in that moment I realized the ending I had been searching for was not the end of anything at all. It was the beginning of a life where ignorance was no longer an option.